coming, everyone. Very nice of you to show up here on a Wednesday night. I'll just get right into it here. I want to talk a little bit about the book, and then I'm going to read an excerpt from it. But first, it's sort of fun to think about how Robert Crumb got from this guy to that guy in the span of about 4 years, let's say. That guy there in his wedding photo from 1964, to that guy on the streets of Haight-Ashbury in June of 1968. And then went on, of course, to create Zgrade Comics and Mr. Natural and so many other fabulous things. Robert Crumb grew up mostly in the Northeast, a little bit on the West Coast for a couple of years, but mostly in Philadelphia and Delaware. He was one of 5 children. And here is the extraordinarily happy family at home. First in 1953 in Oceanside, California, where Robert's father, Chuck, was stationed as a trainer for Marines going off to the Korean War. He had been a Marine in World War II and a recruiter, and very much wanted to go back to Korea to get away from his 5 children. But the Marines thought otherwise and kept him back, precisely because of the 5 children and some difficulties at home. Here they are in about 1960. Robert is, there he is. Over there with the glasses on the right, he's about 17 years old, and Chuck looking happy as usual. This sort of cliche about Crumb, and I'm assuming that most of you here, because why would you be here otherwise? Unless you were friends of my parents. Most of you probably know the sort of mythology around the Crumb family. He really grew up he was born in 1943, grew up throughout the 40s and 50s. And the family was this sort of brilliant clan of 5. And his mother, Bee, was fortunately fairly depressed for most of his life, and then heavily medicated by about 1954, 55, so when Robert's about 11, 12 years old. His older brother, Charles, was a brilliant cartoonist, but also schizophrenic. His younger brother, Maxon, had undiagnosed epilepsy at the time, and so was just sort of considered weird. And Carol, the eldest sister, the firstborn, who is the tallest little girl in the picture, and the only one really smiling right there, was the only one who turned out, quote unquote, normal. She died actually about 5 years ago, not so normal, but things, evolve, as they say. What happened over the years is that this family was sort of saved by comic books. They were total pop culture junkies. And Robert likes to talk about how his working class family was essentially without culture. There were no books in the house. There were magazines, and rare for parents of that time, a lot of comic books. He would go to the grocery store and let the kids pick out comic books as long as they weren't the horror comics. And so Robert and Charles, the 2 eldest brothers, were totally infatuated with this stuff, and so much so that they began to make their own very, very early on. But what they loved, and I'm showing these 3, little Lulu, Pogo on the cover of Animal Comics, and there's our friend Donald Duck on the cover of Walt Disney's comics. These were done by exceptional artists. The little Lulu was written by an artist named John Stanley, and then he would lay it out and be finished by another artist named Irving Tripp. Walt Kelly did Pogo and Animal Comics and a lot of other fabulous fairy tales and other kind of anthropomorphic stories. And the great Donald Duck and then Uncle Scrooge artist, the creator of Uncle Scrooge, was a guy named Carl Barks, who had been a Disney animator, as Kelly had been. and then started doing the Walt Disney Comics, and brought this unbelievable wealth of knowledge, not only about body language, not only like the sort of component parts of being a good cartoonist, crisp communication, and kind of a rhythmic delivery, but he had grown up very poor. He'd been kind of in like a mining town and rough and tumble upbringing, and brought this whole life into these characters. He basically used them as a vehicle to talk about whatever he wanted. He wanted to talk about family dynamics. He could do that. He had a terrible divorce, and suddenly those comics are very sour and angst-ridden. And it's all through these friendly Disney characters. So under the guise of children's comics, these artists delivered like real morality tales, adventure stories that were sprawling and complex, and real stories about a kind of old-time, faintly in the past America that, by the time Robert's 7, 8 years old, is totally gone. But they're still essentially stuck in the Depression. So it gives Robert and Charles not only a sense of storytelling mechanics, but also a sense of you can sneak adult messages into comics of some kind, and also a love of craftsmanship, and in particular, a kind of dusty bygone world that existed before they were even born. Robert talks about being nostalgic for the Depression when he was 8 years old in 1951. It's very early to nostalgia. It was advanced. The other major discovery was Mad Magazine. Like for a lot of people, Art Spiegelman talks about it as being like that Mad rewired a generation as surely as LSD rewired the hippies. For Crumb, in particular, first there is this Mad cover by Basil Wolverton, which is an imitation of Life magazine, which was the standard bearer of American righteousness and goodness and information. And it's just this unbelievably nasty, rude takeoff of it. And for Robert, who was just a kid at that time, it seemed impossible that somebody would make fun of this stuff that you're really not supposed to touch, that you should really respect. And then this other Mad from 1956, number 27, it's just a riot of information, and would inform him forever. And the sort of lesson he got from Mad that he and Spiegelman and a bunch of the underground guys talk about, but Robert in particular, was first it was an exposure to ethnic humor. This was Jewish humor from New York delivered to kids and adults across the country. So that's one amazing thing, and on newsstands everywhere. And second, the basic message was, hey, kids, teenagers, adults, everything you're seeing is bullshit. Like Superman's a bully, Marlon Brando's lame, Elvis is a poser. It was just unrelentingly critical, but also incredibly funny. And as with his other comics, unbelievably well crafted. It's sort of psychotic to think about it now. These incredibly talented geniuses, almost all Jewish, from Brooklyn or Manhattan, and all an incredibly high level of drawing skill and storytelling skill, and also delivering things that were funny. I mean, they're still funny comics. And so you kind of can trace Mad as a tangent. You can trace Mad up through like the Harvard Lampoon, to the National Lampoon, to Saturday Night Live, to The Simpsons, et cetera, et cetera. It's just this sort of one of the kernels, one of the foundations of American humor, basically, in its nastiness and its criticism and sarcasm. But also it's fundamental. If you're making something that well crafted, you're also telegraphing to your audience that you care about them. So it's not just like a kick in the head. It's also saying, hey, we're giving you something to look at here, something to chew on. Come on, come with us, come with us. So he got a lot out of that. And of course, in the mid-1950s, there was the comic book scare, in which Mad became a magazine, EC Comics, which was beloved by many of Robert's generation. closed because there was a scare that comic books were contributing to juvenile delinquency. If only things were still so simple. Robert's mother did not do this to him, but he did imagine this scene because he and his brother Charles were coming home one day in Oceanside, California, I think, and cut through an alleyway, and there in the alley by a garbage can, they found a stack of comics, all of which were ripped in half exactly like that, across the staples. So that it was really difficult to repair. He and Charles took them home and repaired them and had them for years and years. So that was his actual imagining of that scenario. The family made comics together at an astounding pace. Charles started the Animal Town Comics Company, and that was Charles, Robert. Maxon was the supply boy, which he never forgave him for. That was really it. And they made comics monthly, full length, often 24 or 32 page comics monthly for approximately 8 years. I've gone through all of them. Robert has a stack like this high, and that survived. And they're really quite good. These are good. I mean, the funny friends here is from when Robert was 11, Charles would have been 12, and it's surprisingly accomplished. I mean, they really took it seriously. There's advertisements in the back. There's a subscription. And this was just for themselves. They got into this habit of drawing comics for each other and then for the other neighborhood kids. So they'd be passed around and he'd make a couple rounds at school, come back. But there was never an idea that they would be published per se, but they treated them as seriously as working cartoonists. And frankly, I mean, drawing like 24, 32 pages a month, that's a lot on top of going to school. Robert kept progressing, and this is a cover from 1962 of a very early Fritz the Cat. Arcade was the title of one of the many personal publications that Robert and Charles had. They had Arcade. Funny Friends, Note was another one. And this was an anthology that was done in composition books. Robert would draw these very elaborate covers and then fill the interiors with comics and stories and really beautifully rendered drawings. And often he and Charles would do what they called two-man comics, which were comics in which each would draw a character. And they'd be talking to each other as the characters. They would do this for hours. I mean, in 1962, Robert was 19. He had just graduated high school. And this is what they did. They stayed home in the bedroom and drew comics for each other. A little earlier, the boys published Foo, which was a very early fanzine, 1958. Fanzines, for those of you who are not unbelievable nerds, fanzines were mimeographed magazines that were traded between fans in the 1950s and still today, not mimeographed anymore. But at the time, this was sort of amazing. These brothers, at this time they were back in Delaware, it's 1958, and a friend of theirs, a guy named Mike Britt, came over to their place one day and said, hey, I saw in the letters column of Humbug, which was another magazine by the creator, Mad Harvey Kurtzman, that there's such a thing as other kids who were making magazines about this stuff that we're obsessed with. So they sort of realized that there are other people like them, other outsiders, trying to make sense of this humor thing and these weird comics, and so they made their own. They mimeographed their own fanzine Foo, which was a sort of mad knockoff. And that's how they first started getting recognition nationally. They did about 300 copies of each issue, sent them out, and slowly there was sort of this developing legend that there were these brothers in Delaware, the Crumb brothers, who were outrageously talented and kind of mysterious. It was a little unclear who did what, when, how were they able to draw this well? Were they really that young? And later, many of the people that got those issues of Foo were among the first writers about comics, underground comics, and also comics history in the late 60s. And some of the first comic book store owners. It was a tiny, fascinating little circle of people who were in touch very early on, and then grew with each other. You know, Art Spiegelman was one of them, a little later, he's younger, another guy named Jay Lynch. People were in touch, and it was a kind of solace for an otherwise really solitary pursuit. So, skipping ahead a little bit, Robert graduates high school in 1961, and then spends about a year at home, basically depressed, doing nothing, except drawing comics, just endless comics in his notebooks, not sending them out or anything like that, just drawing, Charles. And they used to, what they talked about it as walk in the streets. They would walk the streets of Delaware and talk about philosophy, talk about Karl Marx, talk about Harvey Kurtzman, talk about Catholicism, on and on. Eventually, Robert could have gone one of two ways. Charles was really beginning to slip into madness at that point, and seemed like he wasn't going to leave home. And Robert's parents were having really terrible physical fights. His mother attempted to commit suicide. Robert ran away, he came back. And eventually, a fanzine friend of his, a guy named Marty Pauls, who lived in Cleveland, said, I'm looking for a roommate, why don't you come to Cleveland and give it a shot, like get out of there, basically. So he did, so he left, and he was, he survived, he left, and went to Cleveland, to Marty's place. Marty Pauls is a story for another time. Fascinating guy who was really Crumb's first biographer in a sense. He committed suicide before he finished. I finished. It was a long time ago. It's okay to laugh. It was 1987. Marty was a college boy, so Marty had access to adult sarcasm and poetry and things like that, and records and art museums. Marty was educated. Robert went straight from high school to Cleveland, but he was so talented. He went to an employment agency, and they said, well, what can you do? And he said, I can draw. So they called up American Greetings, which was the number 2 greeting card company in the country at the time, in '62. And remember greeting cards? Big business, huge business. And so American Greetings at the time had an enormous red brick building in Cleveland where they designed, wrote, and printed, and then distributed the cards. So it was all this enormous factory started by a guy named Jacob Saperstein, a pushcart salesman in the 1920s, I think. It grew and grew and grew, and Robert, they needed people who could just do things with their hands. So Robert went in as a trainee, worked in the basement, and one day he was doodling by his desk on a sheet of paper, as he tended to do, as he still does. And one of the executives came down and saw it and said, you should probably come upstairs. And instead of getting in trouble, he was promoted until about 1964, when he had a job, a kind of a killer job as a pretty highly paid greeting card artist, and a sought-after job. I mean, he jokes about it. It wasn't New York, it wasn't Chicago, it was Cleveland, but it was pretty good. And he could have stayed. He was a total star in American Greetings. This guy here, he did things like this, cute. And this is where he developed, he learned a lot. It's kind of a crucial thing to underground comics and everything that came after, in a way, because Robert got training. He was a natural storyteller. He was an autodidact writer and artist, but he learned really firsthand by getting notes and critiques how to draw for communication. Not just for expression, not just to spin a yarn that might fizzle out, but to actually communicate and land a joke, land a punchline, move on to the next. And he learned how to make color separations, which was very important later, because he was the only guy around San Francisco doing comics who could actually do the color separations for the covers to print in color. And he taught a lot of people how to do that. So he's doing that in Cleveland in '64. He gets married to Dana Morgan. He does Nystrom, nice drawings, nice guy. He does, there we are. Does a little time in New York, does some great New York reportage in Harlem. He and Dana go on a honeymoon, and he does a report from Bulgaria, which is quite wonderful. He draws the adventures of a sort of poetic collegiate guy, Fritz the Cat, which is modeled loosely on the circle of friends in Cleveland, all these guys who were just out of college in Cleveland. And, it's the early '60s, it's post-beatnik, pre-hippie, so everything's sort of just on the verge. It's folk music, it's D.A. Levy's poetry, and Ginsberg is in there, and he sees Buffy St. Marie in the coffee house and does these sort of satirical comics. And if he had stayed with this, he would have been a really solid footnote to the development of American comics. But instead, in 1965, he started taking acid, pharmaceutical grade Sandoz acid, which, that's a whole other story. Somehow, for some reason, the Bell Lab in Cleveland was developing LSD, probably for the Defense Department, and that's where this LSD came from. It was, as Robert calls it, machine grade LSD. So he began doing that, and he started to look like this, which is different than how he looked before. And eventually, he got a call from his hero, Harvey Kurtzman, in 1965. Harvey, who had done Mad, says, "Come to New York, I've got a job for you, it's gonna be great." Kurtzman had a magazine then called Help, which was a very early humor magazine for the likes of John Cleese, Woody Allen, Mort Saul, innumerable comedians that we've all forgotten. Jonathan Winters, great, interesting comedians doing writing for it, and also Kurtzman was publishing some of the early underground guys when they were teenagers, fan art from Spiegelman and J. Lynch and others. Anyway, he gets there, Kurtzman says, "Oh, the magazine's closing." So that was that. So we helped him get jobs in New York. He got a job with a guy named Woody Gelman, who was an amazing talent, great eye for talent in Brooklyn, doing Topps bubblegum cards. So Robert drew monster greetings, they were called, and gradually kept honing his chops, so it was kind of on the edge. He and Dana, his wife, were not getting along well. So in early '66, he and Dana decided to take acid one night together. And Dana had her own supply. Robert took some from a guy named Buzzy Linhart, who, if any of you are deep freak folk fans, you might remember that name. Buzzy Linhart gave Robert some acid a few months earlier, called him immediately, said, "Robert, don't take that acid. Bad acid." Robert put it in the fridge anyway. Flash forward, and he forgot that it was bad acid. He just took the acid. So they're on this trip together. Robert announces that they are getting divorced. Dana, who was at the time about 20, did not like that idea. So as they were emerging from the trip, she gave him chicken soup, which tasted terrible, and because it was filled with sleeping pills. She just wanted to sedate him, just, make him think it over. He claims that she wanted to kill him. She said, who knows? Who cares? The point is, She left. She went back to Cleveland. And Robert was alone in New York, and as he described it, in a sort of green haze. His mind wasn't functioning well. He was fuzzy around the edges. Couldn't quite figure out what was going on. So Marty Pauls, who had saved him in Cleveland, said, why don't you come to Chicago and chill out here for a little while and we'll figure this out. So he goes to Chicago. And now I'm going to read. Chicago in 1966, these are mostly Crumb drawings. Chicago in 1966 was still a city of industry, of slaughterhouses and steel mills, printing and publishing. It was, for Robert, somehow the focal point of what was left of that Midwestern blind enthusiasm for making it. Though Robert didn't know it, the counterculture was just beginning to pick up. A group of 6 young graduates at the Art Institute of Chicago opened a raunchy cartoon-inflected art show, Harry Who, just 2 weeks before Robert showed up. Robert's only hope for employment at that time was Playboy. He had a recommendation from Harvey Kurtzman, who had sent his work to Shel Silverstein, who is it's kind of a forgotten fun fact now that Shel Silverstein, of The Giving Tree and many other great books, was a total sex-crazed libertine, and doing amazing drawings. So Playboy was still headquartered in the Windy City and was one of the best-paying cartoon gigs in the country. Through Shel Silverstein and Harvey Kurtzman, the associate cartoon editor Michelle Altman agreed to see Robert at her apartment in a downtown high-rise. She answered the door in a see-through negligee, and Robert, nervous and totally intimidated by a woman who perhaps held the key to his fame and fortune, launched into a Timothy Leary spiel about the powers of LSD to heal what ailed America. She was already hit to the drug and totally unimpressed. She was even less impressed by this bony, poorly dressed, Coke bottle thick spectacle wearing kid and his random ink drawings. She took his sketchbook for further inspection and dismissed him. The next communication he received from Playboy was a request to retrieve his artwork at his downtown office. No dice. After a couple days of no work in sight, Robert spent about 5 days alternately glued to Marty Pauls' couch and wandering the city. The psychic fog would not quit. Quote, the whole time I was in this fuzzy state of mind, it broke open somehow. A grotesque kaleidoscope, a tawdry carnival of disassociated images kept sputtering to the surface, especially if I was sitting and staring, which I often did. It was difficult to function in this condition. Trying to get grounded in the world outside his mind, he walked the 2 miles back and forth from the Loop to the Chicago River. One day he rode the entire north-south route of the 22 Clark bus, recording the passing signs in gangly columns on a single sketchbook page. Weekends, like so many other artists and musicians in the city, Robert and Marty visited the vast Maxwell Street flea market, seeing, quote, endless stalls of guys selling purple pants, rhythm and blues records, chitterlings, and snap-brim hats. At night, they threw rejected 78 RPM records at the advancing rats in Marty's truly gross apartment. Nothing good, Marty would later remember with the deadpan alacrity of a true collector. By the end of his first week in Chicago, the merry-go-round buzzing in Robert's head was finally beginning to impact his drawing. He'd been resisting it. He'd been trying to wait it out while still attempting to draw in his professional greeting card guy mode. The Robert Crumb we know now, the one that made Zap and the Cheap Thrills record cover and all the rest, really surfaced around March 15th, 1966, on this sketchbook page. And, you see he's on the bus, you can see some fairly realistic portraits, but there on the bottom, you see those pinheads with the big shoes. That's the first time he drew the characters that became the Keep On Trucking characters. Those guys with their feet out, splayed back, trucking down the avenue. It was the first time he began drawing these big shoes. It was just a private artistic breakthrough. Also, he felt like a pinhead. He felt like he didn't have it all there. Robert's His small reputation thus far was still based on acute, self-aware, and concise drawings that would sidle into the early 1960s upscale and unblemished visual world's Esquire magazine, like Jules Feiffer and Milton Glaser. The way Robert drew this character belonged to the vanished pre-war absurd grotesque tradition of newspaper cartoonists Rube Goldberg and Bill Pullman. They had these scritchy, scratchy lines and balloon forms that were anathema to slick, modern, contemporary graphics of the really the 1950s and 60s. They drew big shoes that cracked sidewalks, straw hair, and big noses, and they worked in a sort of nonsense language with an unreasonably peppy pace, giving the comics the kind of antic feel of a Marx Brothers film. This was really middle and working class cartooning that aspired to merely enhance the daily lives of vast urban populations. For Robert, cartooning by these guys, quote, reflected the world that those people lived in, that ordinary, everyday American world that was just in the background, in there in some deep way that the guys weren't even aware of. The fissure in Robert's perceptual ground through which the pin had emerged opened up further possibilities. He kept drawing the rubbery grotesques, but the ultimate shift came one day when he and Marty went to a used magazine shop in a poverty-lacerated neighborhood in North Chicago. They walked down a long stretch of West Madison Street past soup kitchens, employment agencies, and abandoned storefronts before reaching the store, its grimy windows piled high with old periodicals. In front, Robert swears, he witnessed a wisp of a man with a leashed chicken on his head, playing an accordion. Every few beats, the performer would drop the bird to the pavement and dance a little jig around it. They were rewarded for this journey with stacks and stacks of Z-grade comic books from the 1940s. Titles like Crazy Comics, Barnyard Comics, Super Duck, Cuckoo, Ha Ha, Frisky Fables. These were all released by like third-tier publishers, eager to get in on the World War II era craze for both comic books and talking animal-driven animated features. And there were floors and floors, basements below the ambitious, finely crafted structures of Karl Marx's Donald Duck comics for Disney or Walt Kelly's Pogo comics. So rather than pay to license Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny or Donald Duck, these publishers just contracted with packaging companies to invent new funny characters. They were mostly drawn by moonlighting animators, supplementing their income from studios like Warner Brothers, or Disney, or Columbia Pictures. Writers and artists who might have spent the day working on Pinocchio or Fantasia or Looney Tunes, but, you know, on boozy Saturday afternoons, they'd all gather in one guy's living room, smoke and drink until it was all gone, and crank through comic books. Then they'd ship the pages back to New York, and the publishers would crank it out. Marty bought a bag full of these comics for a nickel a piece. Robert was completely entranced and inspired. Once they returned home, Robert stayed in Marty's apartment examining this new world. He couldn't unsee the animals blithely perpetrating chaos on an infinitely malleable world. I mean, you can see here on Crazy Comic. I mean, that's sort of insane. Look at how malicious that is. And that's drawn by an angry man. The dramatic arcs and consistent characters of Robert's own work, and certainly of Fritz, now seemed completely passé, overly earnest. Quote, the visionary part of my mind was set on some kind of automatic level. It was electronic and buzzy. If I was sitting on a bus or not doing something active, it would immediately start to take over, and I would just get lost in this weird new cartoon vision of reality. It was very inspiring and completely changed the subject matter of my drawing. So suddenly his work began to break down into stranger, grittier, non-linear ideas. And he began indexing these characters that were suddenly coming to him really fast. He lost all interest in trying to reflect contemporary reality. He didn't want to do the college stories anymore, stories about boys and girls in love. He immediately began improvising comic strips directly in his sketchbook with his number 0 rapidograph, which is the thinnest possible drafting pen you can get. And because it doesn't allow for line variant variation, it allowed him to focus solely on his interior vision without concern for the look and feel of the marks he was making. It was as close as he had come to direct transference from hand to page. The first sketchbook comic strip in Robert's new mode is Hor Page, behind me. 24 tiny panels, one image leading to another through only visual associations. It begins with a rotund male wiping snot on a nude woman, chasing her with a bus, which multiplies to infinite buses, and on and on and on. It's the first time Robert allowed sexual aggression into his work, with the implied adolescent reasoning that women always prefer the jock, as opposed to himself, a wallflower. It's one part wish fulfillment, one part satire, and all a product of Robert's acid-drenched subconscious. It's also the inadvertent prototype of everything that came after. 6 pages after Hor Page is a mock comic book cover, Drek, March 1966. And you can see immediately that this was a different artist. It's a cylindrical, sinister Barker casting his giant oval eyes to the heavens. It's terrifyingly cheerful. Drawing by drawing, he developed his new world in his sketchbook. 2 pages after Drek is a comic strip, exactly the American boy egg dealer, which was based on Charles, who liked to throw eggs. And soon after, our comic book covers, that were just him trying to figure out what he was doing. Here is Sludge number 12, which declares sludge comics are squinky comics, featuring the old Pooparoo and introducing the hilarious, sizzling adventures of Shabno the shoehorn dog. These are all characters that he was just coming up with as he was drawing, and also characters that would stay with him for a couple decades. Squinky was a great phrase that Robert had plucked from his fanzine past. The cultural critic Gershon Legman coined the term horror squinky in 1950 to refer to both funny animal and horror comics that he felt indoctrinated children and teens into violence under the cover of mythic storytelling and sublimated sex. Squinky, like the content it embodied, became a term Robert embraced. He liked the idea that was in there. 16 pages in his sketchbook after Sludge on a single page, Robert memorialized his cast of characters, past and present, as if drawing a group portrait. Here's Sniff the Panda, Mr. Natural, exactly, Fritz the Cat, Yin and Yang, and the old Pooparoo. A few sheets later, Snoid and Flaky Boot joined, and 16 pages after that, inspired by Marty's observation that the lean-back, feet-out fellas he was drawing here on this page were trucking like the 1930s dance, Robert began iterating on that, trying to figure out how to turn this page from 66 into this page in 68. These characters, the names and the appearances would change, but these characters for Robert were, he says, the psychotic manifestations of some grimy part of America's collective unconscious. For him, this collective unconscious was and is, quote, the product of a commercial, industrialized, capitalist society drenched in low-grade, dishonest, popular entertainment, populated with human stereotypes of all kinds, from race to gender to class. By the end of March, just 3 weeks after his arrival in Chicago, Robert had found the language and discovered the vehicle for his long simmering ideas about life, sex, race, and civilization. And he would go on to do Zack, which we saw earlier, and of course the East Village Other, and Weirdo, and covers for the New Yorker, and the Book of Genesis, and everything else. And that's the story for now. You can read the rest in the book. Available here. Any questions?
Yeah, Dan.
Since you brought up Robert's career in Cleveland with American Greetings, has anyone ever reprinted those cards?
You know, the answer is no. They were reprinted in the late 80s or early 1990s in black and white in the complete Crumb books, but there's never been a book of them. American Greetings, I'm not sure who owns it. I think the family still retains some percentage of it, but American Greetings has the rights, and I think there was somebody who was working on a book of them that contacted me, but I don't think it ever came to pass. A guy in LA was working on a book. They're wonderful, and Robert has a great file of them, and yeah, it would be a great book. I think American Greetings is perfectly happy to do it, but yeah, not yet, not properly.
The images I noticed were from the sketchbooks.
Yeah.
So were you in the south of France, you got to see the original sketchbooks, or is that from the copies from
That would have been nice. I saw a lot of original sketchbooks in the south of France. Though these are just iPhone shots from the printed sketchbooks. But he, I mean, to make a living over the years, has sold a huge amount of his sketchbooks. He still has quite a few that are wonderful. And I got to spend a lot of time with those. And I have to say, even though he's intent on printing those sketchbooks as line art, essentially as graphics as opposed to drawings, you know, I would like to see them published one day. But as I told my parents, I'm getting out of the Crumb business. But for someone out there, convince the old man to reprint them in color. So you can see his corrections, and you can see all the things that he redacted from the all the sketchbooks. This is a real deep cut that's really nuts. Robert has been revising his sketchbooks for 50 years. So there was a comic book in like 72 or 73 called Artistic Comics that reprinted some sketchbooks. Those were sort of unvarnished, the actual sketchbooks. Then he got self-conscious and he began correcting the sketchbooks so that and drawing into them. And so you might look at a sketchbook that says it's from 1977, and I realize this makes me anxious. You look at a sketchbook from 77 and realize that Robert in 2005 had gone in and corrected it, which for a historian is a fucking nightmare. And so each volume of the sketchbooks that have been published have started in Germany in 78, and then Fantagraphics picked it up in the 90s, and Taschen picked it up. Each one of those is actually different because Robert goes in, even now that he only has Xeroxes of them, he'll correct the Xeroxes and send an entirely new set to be published. So everyone is slightly different, and they're also missing things that he felt weren't up to snuff. There's a lot of writing in the sketchbooks that's never been published. Yeah, I have it all on my iPhone, but you'll never see it. Yeah, it's those sketchbooks are to die for.
So going on that, I know Eileen's brother is on there.
Aileen's brother, yeah.
Eileen's brother, and is he selling Robert's stuff to help support himself? So do you think some of the original art will come out because of his brother?
He's not allowed to sell anything anymore. Let's just say that not everyone was aware that he was selling things. It was a little complicated. You know, families are complicated. Yeah, no, there's no more of that.
I know the sisters weren't involved in the film in the 90s.
Yeah.
Were you able to, I know one of them has passed away.
They were both gone by the time I started.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Carol, the only living sister, Carol, was just hanging on when I started the book. Mm-hmm. And Robert only made a few requests of me. And one of them was that I not bother her. And he felt like she was too fragile. She's actually living, well, I say not far from here because it's closer to here than New York. He was living in a place called Rock Hall, Maryland, way south. And he said, don't trouble her. So I didn't.
Were you?
And then she died. So
were you able to find any material that may have presented their point of view
of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
no, their point of view of him. Were you able to find?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I have letters that Carol very carefully kept a scrapbook of the family, which she gave to Robert before she passed. And in that scrapbook, there was correspondence from over the years, and also there's a lot of. His father was a good writer who really aspired to be a great writer, and wrote a lot of letters back home to Minnesota in which he would talk about the family. And then the sisters wrote, in some cases, they would write to each other, they'd write to Robert, write to the other siblings, sometimes like to Jay Lynch and a few other close friends of the family. There are letters, not Jay Lynch, Jane Lynch, his wife. So there are some things. It's tricky with this stuff. It doesn't confirm. It confirms a lot. It doesn't contradict much. I mean, Carol's point of view was that the troubles of that family were not uncommon to that time. And, I think these were pretty extreme troubles. I don't think it was that common, but certainly it wasn't uncommon for a woman in the 50s to be overprescribed, sedatives or diet pills. I mean, that was common. It was a little less common for her to, for the parents to have physical altercations in front of the children. So it's sort of, that correspondence shaves a little bit of the out and out grotesqueness of it away, makes it a little more human. It's interesting stuff.
How did it go last night?
Last night was fabulous. You should have been there. Last night was really fun. Robert was in great spirits, and our moderator, Naomi Fry, was fabulous. And we just had a total laugh. It was very, very, very funny. For whatever reason, we just kind of settled into a very funny groove and talked about the book and made each other laugh a lot. And it was like almost 950 people, and it was great. No complaints. Any other questions, concerns? Okay. Thanks so much. I guess I'm gonna sign this right there.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you also for coming out tonight so that I can Politics and Prose. If you would just listen to
Fresh book. Oh, you've already put it in my locker.
If you are willing and eager to make sure in case you get something sturdy, you're putting next to the back bar. If you would like your signs, please go to my lovely colleague in the green cardigan. I'll start with her. Thank you all so much.